As Pedro Patel sat at his desk, staring blankly at the computer screen in front of him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He'd been working as a senior accountant at Smithson & Company, a mid-sized manufacturing firm in suburban Chicago, for nearly 5 years, consistently delivering high-quality work and earning praise from his superiors. But all of that changed on this particular Monday morning when his boss, Mark Nelson, called him into his office with a curt expression on his face. Pedro had a sense of foreboding as he stood up from his chair and walked to Mark's office. Wondering what could be wrong, when he arrived, Mark barely looked up from the papers on his desk, saying simply, "Pedro, we appreciate your contributions to the company, but we've decided to go in a different direction. Your services will no longer be needed." Effective immediately, Pedro was taken aback. Stunned by the suddenness and vagueness of the termination, he asked Mark if there was a specific reason for the decision, but Mark just shook his head, saying it was a business decision and not personal. Pedro pressed on, asking if there was anything he could do to change the outcome or if there were any performance issues that he wasn't aware of, but Mark remained tight-lipped, eventually escorting Pedro out of the building with a security guard, leaving him feeling confused, angry, and more than a bit suspicious. As he walked out into the chilly morning air, Pedro couldn't help but wonder if this was some kind of racial profiling or discriminatory practice. Given the lack of cause or explanation, he felt a burning sense of injustice and decided then and there that he wouldn't let the matter drop without a fight. Over the next few days, Pedro tried to get more information about his termination, reaching out to HR and even his former colleagues, but no one seemed willing to talk. It was as if he'd been erased from the company. The silence and lack of transparency only fueled his determination to uncover the truth. As a meticulous and detail-oriented accountant, Pedro had always been fascinated by financial analysis and loved digging deep into numbers. So when he left Smithson & Company, he decided to make good use of his severance package and do some digging of his own into the company's financial records. He'd been given access to a wide range of documents during his tenure, and he remembered some inconsistencies that had caught his eye. Pedro spent hours poring over financial statements, invoices, and receipts, looking for any discrepancies or red flags that might indicate what was really going on at Smithson & Company, and then after days of searching he finally found something that made his heart skip a beat. A series of large payments to a shell company that he'd never seen before. The payments were buried deep in the accounts payable section, but Pedro's experience and keen eye for detail allowed him to spot them. He immediately felt a rush of excitement mixed with trepidation. Could this be the smoking gun he was looking for? As he dug deeper, Pedro discovered that the shell company was linked to none other than Mark Nelson's brother, a man named James Nelson, who had a history of shady business dealings. The more Pedro looked into it, the more he realized that this could be just the tip of the iceberg. He started to piece together a complex web of transactions, all pointing to a massive fraud scheme that went all the way to the top of the company. Pedro's findings indicated that Smithson & Company was involved in a $5 million embezzlement scheme, with money laundered through various shell companies and offshore accounts. The scope and sophistication of the scheme were breathtaking, and Pedro knew he had to act fast to protect himself and expose the truth. But as he sat in his home office, staring at the stack of documents and evidence he'd gathered, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. And then just as he was about to pack up for the day, he received a mysterious text message that read, "You're getting close, Pedro, back off while you still can." Pedro's heart raced as he read the message. Who was behind it, and how did they know what he was doing? He knew he had to be careful, but he also knew he couldn't back down now. The stakes were too high, and the truth was too important. As he pondered his next move, Pedro's phone rang. It was an unknown number, but he answered anyway. The voice on the other end said, "Pedro, you're in grave danger. Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th and Main at midnight if you want to know the truth about Smithson & Company." And then the line went dead. Pedro was left staring at his phone, wondering who was behind the mysterious call and what they wanted from him. But one thing was certain, he had to go to that meeting. His life and the truth depended on it. As the clock struck midnight, Pedro made his way to the warehouse, his heart pounding in his chest. What would he find there? Would he uncover the truth behind the $5 million fraud, or would he become the next victim? The darkness outside seemed to mirror the uncertainty inside him, and as he approached the warehouse, he couldn't help but wonder what secrets lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uplift Black voices and expose hidden truths. As Pedro stepped into the dimly lit warehouse, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay, He couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. The only sound came from the creaking of old wooden beams and the distant hum of a city that never slept. He looked around, trying to spot anyone or anything out of the ordinary, but the warehouse seemed deserted. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, dressed in a black coat and a hoodie that cast a shadow over her face. She beckoned Pedro to follow her, leading him deeper into the warehouse. "Who are you?" Pedro asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone who wants to see justice done," she replied, her voice low and mysterious. As they walked, Pedro noticed that the woman seemed to know the warehouse like the back of her hand. She navigated through the maze of crates and boxes with ease, finally stopping at a small office in the corner. Inside the office, the woman pulled out a stack of documents and began to explain the scope of the fraud scheme at Smithson and Company. Pedro listened intently, his mind racing with the implications. "It's not just about the money," she said. "It's about the people who will be hurt by this scheme. Employees who will lose their jobs, investors who will lose their savings. We need to take them down." Pedro's eyes widened as he realized the true extent of the scheme. He felt a surge of determination and knew he had to be part of bringing the perpetrators to justice. Just as he was about to ask the woman more questions, she glanced at her watch and suddenly stood up. "I'm sorry, Pedro. I didn't mean to stay this long. We have to get out of here. Now." Before Pedro could react, the woman grabbed his arm and pulled him out of the office. They were halfway across the warehouse when Pedro heard the sound of footsteps echoing off the walls. "What's going on?" Pedro asked, his heart racing. The woman didn't answer. She just kept pulling him towards the exit. They were almost there when Pedro saw a group of men emerging from the shadows, their faces twisted with menace. "We have to go now," the woman shouted, pushing Pedro towards the door. As they burst out into the night air, Pedro heard the sound of gunfire behind them. The woman pulled him into a nearby alleyway, and they sprinted down the narrow passageway. Pedro's heart was pounding in his chest. Who were these people? And why were they shooting at them? As they reached the end of the alleyway, the woman pushed Pedro into a waiting car. She jumped in beside him, and the driver sped away into the night. Pedro looked back, watching as the warehouse receded into the distance. He turned to the woman, demanding answers. "Who are you?" he asked. "And what's going on?" The woman smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "My name is Sarah," she said. "And I'm the one who's been trying to take down Smithson and Company for years. But now we're in grave danger. They'll stop at nothing to silence us." As Pedro processed this information, Sarah's expression turned grim. "We need to get you to a safe house," she said. "But I have to warn you, Pedro. We're not the only ones who know your name. You're in grave danger." Just as Pedro was trying to process this warning, his phone rang. He answered, and a cold voice spoke on the other end. "Pedro, you're a clever accountant. But you're also a dead man walking. You'll never make it to the safe house alive." The line went dead and Pedro's eyes met Sarah's. They both knew they were running out of time. As the car sped through the night, Pedro wondered if he'd make it out alive. And then, just as he was starting to feel a glimmer of hope, the car skidded to a halt. The driver shouted a warning and Sarah's eyes went wide with fear. "We've been ambushed," she whispered. And as Pedro looked up, he saw the men from the warehouse closing in on them, their faces twisted with deadly intent. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uplift Black voices and expose hidden truths. As the men closed in, Sarah quickly assessed the situation. She knew they had to act fast if they wanted to get out alive. She grabbed Pedro's arm and pulled him out of the car, shouting to the driver to create a diversion. The driver nodded and sped away, drawing the attackers' attention. Meanwhile, Sarah pulled Pedro into a nearby alleyway, using her knowledge of the area to navigate through the narrow passageways. "We need to get to the safe house," she said, her voice low and urgent. "It's the only way we'll be able to keep you safe." Pedro nodded, his heart racing as they ran. He could hear the men behind them, their footsteps echoing off the walls. As they turned a corner, Sarah suddenly stopped and pushed Pedro into a doorway. She pulled out a gun and aimed it down the alleyway, her eyes scanning the shadows. "What's going on?" Pedro asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've got company," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "Stay close to me." Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was one of the men from the warehouse, his face twisted with anger. Sarah didn't hesitate. She fired her gun and the man fell to the ground. But as Pedro looked around, he realized that they were surrounded. There were more men closing in, their faces cold and calculating. "We need to get out of here now," Sarah said, grabbing Pedro's arm and pulling him down the alleyway. They ran as fast as they could, but Pedro could hear the men gaining on them. He knew they couldn't keep this up for much longer. Just when he thought they were going to be caught, Sarah pulled him into a small doorway. It led to a cramped stairwell and she pushed him down the stairs. "Where are we going?" Pedro asked, his voice echoing off the walls. "The safe house," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll be safe here." As they reached the bottom of the stairs, Pedro saw a door with a combination lock. Sarah quickly entered the code and the door swung open. Inside, Pedro saw a small room filled with computers and surveillance equipment. It was some kind of high-tech hideout. Sarah locked the door behind them and leaned against it, her chest heaving with exertion. "We're safe for now," she said. "But we can't stay here forever. We need to take down Smithson and Company once and for all." Pedro nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. He knew they had to act fast before the company could silence them forever. As he looked around the room, he saw a computer screen flickering to life. It displayed a message sent from an unknown sender. "You're not safe," the message read. "I'll always find you." Pedro's eyes met Sarah's and they both knew that their time was running out. But as Pedro looked closer at the screen, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A camera feed showed a figure standing outside the safe house, watching and waiting. The figure's face was obscured, but Pedro knew they were in grave danger. And then the lights in the room began to flicker and the computer screen went black. Pedro's heart sank as he realized that their safe house had been compromised. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uplift Black voices and expose hidden truths. As the lights flickered, Pedro's heart sank. He knew they had to act fast. Sarah quickly moved to the computer, trying to reboot the system. But it was too late. The door to the safe house burst open, and a figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the dim light. "Welcome, Pedro," the figure said, its voice dripping with malice. "I've been waiting for you." Sarah stood up, her gun trained on the figure. But Pedro saw that it was Mark Nelson, his former boss. He looked different, his eyes cold and calculating. "Mark, what's going on?" Pedro asked, trying to stall for time. "You really don't know, do you?" Mark replied, a smile spreading across his face. "You're just a pawn in a much larger game, Pedro. And now, it's time for you to be removed from the board." Sarah fired her gun, but Mark was too quick. He dodged the bullet and lunged at her. Pedro watched in horror as the two of them struggled, the gun flying out of Sarah's hand. Pedro knew he had to act fast. He grabbed a nearby chair and swung it at Mark, hitting him squarely on the head. Mark stumbled back, giving Pedro and Sarah time to escape. They ran out of the safe house into the night. But Pedro knew they couldn't keep running forever. They had to take down Smithson and Company once and for all. As they emerged onto the streets, Pedro saw a figure waiting for them. It was a woman, her face familiar. "Alexandra," Sarah said, her voice filled with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I've come to help," Alexandra replied, her eyes locked on Pedro. "I've been investigating Smithson and Company for months. I know everything." Pedro's eyes narrowed. Could he trust her? "What do you know?" he asked. "I know about the $5 million fraud," Alexandra replied. "And I know who's behind it all. It's not Mark Nelson. It's someone much higher up." Pedro's eyes widened as Alexandra revealed the truth. He felt a mix of emotions, shock, anger, and determination. "Who is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alexandra smiled, a hint of triumph in her eyes. "It's the CEO of Smithson and Company," she said. "And I have proof." Just as Pedro was about to ask more questions, Alexandra's phone rang. She answered, her expression changing from determination to shock. "What is it?" Pedro asked, his heart racing. Alexandra's eyes locked on his, filled with fear. "It's the CEO," she said. "He knows we're onto him. And he's coming for us." As Alexandra spoke, Pedro heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The CEO's henchmen were closing in. "We have to get out of here now," Sarah said, grabbing Pedro's arm. But as they turned to run, Pedro saw the CEO himself standing behind them, a smile spreading across his face. "You fools," he said. "You think you can take me down? I have the entire company in my pocket. Pedro knew they were running out of time. The CEO's men were closing in and they had to act fast. But just as he was about to make a move, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uplift Black voices and expose hidden truths. As Pedro looked at the CEO, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The CEO was holding a folder filled with documents, and on the cover, Pedro saw his own name. "What is that?" Pedro asked, his voice shaking with fear. "Your entire history, Pedro," the CEO replied, a smile spreading across his face. "I know everything about you. And soon everyone else will too." Sarah stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "You'll never get away with this," she said. "We'll expose you for the fraud that you are." The CEO laughed, a cold, calculating sound. "You'll try," he said. "But I'll always be one step ahead. And soon, Pedro here will be silenced forever." Pedro knew he had to act fast. He looked at Alexandra, who nodded in agreement. "We have the proof we need," she said. "Let's take him down." With newfound determination, Pedro, Sarah, and Alexandra launched a final attack on the CEO and his cohorts. In a tense showdown, they managed to overpower them and expose the truth about the $5 million fraud. As the authorities arrived to take the CEO away, Pedro felt a sense of relief wash over him. Justice had been served. But as he looked at Sarah and Alexandra, he knew that this was more than just a victory. It was a testament to the power of teamwork and determination. "You guys were amazing," Pedro said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "We made a great team," she said. "And we proved that even the smallest person can make a big difference." As Pedro nodded in agreement, Alexandra spoke up. "The moral of the story is that integrity and determination can overcome even the greatest obstacles," she said. "And when we work together towards a common goal, we can achieve great things." Pedro nodded, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. He knew that he had learned a valuable lesson, one that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The story of Pedro and the $5 million fraud came to an end, but the impact of their actions would be felt for years to come. They had exposed corruption and brought justice to those who had been wronged. And in doing so, they had proven that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for a better tomorrow. The end. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uplift Black voices and expose hidden truths.